Welcome back to Precious Metal Gents. I am Zan here with Brian, and this is going to be the first episode that kicks off our series of episodes dedicated to the Precious Metal Gems Parallel. Obviously, we named the show after it, which means we like it. Our plan is to have sort of a multi-episode, stretch of maybe 4 or 5, maybe even more episodes. Probably not more than 6, but we're going to go through the sets in detail, all sports, all years, and have a few guests on that have never been on podcasts before, some what you might call heavy hitters. So we're looking forward to that. But tonight we're going to just start off with an overview of the 3 years, kind of go through some specifics and whatnot. So stay tuned for that. First up is Mail Day. I don't have anything, but Brian, you supplemented the Amon Green collection. What'd you pick up?
I picked up the 1999 Skybox Shining Star Rubies. It's out of 30. The Amon Green, it's his only rubies across all the years. He doesn't obviously have the 97 because he was a rookie in 98. It's odd that he doesn't have a 98. And then he also doesn't have a 2000 because it was kind of, I think it was in between seasons where he was getting traded that year. Wasn't really do much in 2000, so he wasn't in that set either. So this is his only rubies. It's out of 30. Never seen the card before. It was a raw copy. It's pretty clean. I mean, I don't think it would grade super high, but I don't really care. It's just it never pops up, and I got it for a good price. So it was a good addition to the Amon Green collection. I was pretty happy to see that pop up on eBay auction.
Very clean looking card. I was telling you beforehand, I really love the Seahawks uniforms in the 90s. So this is a really, really sharp looking card. And I'm not a huge fan of that year, but for whatever reason, the photo that I've got up here on the screen for you to see on YouTube, really nice looking. So congrats on that. I know the Amon Green PC has had some big additions to it pretty recently. So I know you're enjoying that, but you still got to add those 2 credentials, right?
Yeah, I had a shot at those. I had a shot at the 98. Both of the 98s. I think it was maybe like earlier this year or last year, and I don't know why I didn't get them. I was dragging my feet, and then somebody swooped in and bought both of them. And then there was another couple around, but they're with a collector, and he's not going to part with them. So it's like I'm just kind of holding pattern. One of them I can't remember what they're serial numbered to now. I think one is pretty low. I think it might be the now is like in the teens, and then the future might be like in the 30s or 50. I don't know, something like that.
I think it's 46 and 15.
Okay,
the 15 is I think the now. The future's the low one, the 15. So
yeah,
he's in the training camp gear, but it's not as bad as like Brady in the sweatpants,
yeah.
All right, so we've got since we are kicking off Precious Metal Gems overview episode, we picked a few sales for card of the week, some big ones that ended recently. We had a 1997-98 Kobe Bryant championship PMG PSA 7 that ended on, I think it was Fanatics Premier, for $144,000, which actually matches the sale from 2022 of the BGS 9, $144,000. So big sale there. Another big sale, the 1997-98 green PMG of Tim Duncan in a BGS 8 just sold for $168,000 through Sotheby's, which is interesting. I saw that they're starting to get into selling high-end cards, which I don't know how that's going to play out, if it's going to have any adverse effect on auctions or whether it's just going to bring more competition to everything. But they're going to be selling some high-end cards now. This one didn't do as well as the sale in 2021 of $218,000. That Duncan, I mean, $168,000, still obviously strong sales. Duncan rookie. We saw his 98 899 Gem Masters sell for 144 grand earlier this year. So he's had a couple of strong sales so far this year on PMGs. And then we also had a football, Barry Sanders, a PMG Red, PSA 9 sold for $54,000, which is a all-time high for him, and actually outsold his last public sale of a green PMG, which is 2020. So that's probably why. That was a PSA 7 that went for 48 grand. The last two PSA, the other two highest selling red PMGs are PSA 7 for 19,000 in 2023 and a PSA 6 for I think about 16, 17,000 also in 2023. But Brian, what do you make of that Sanders sale? I feel like the Kobe and Duncan, not too surprising, but the Sanders sale, that number has a little bit of eye-popping sticker shock. But when you consider the grade, what are your thoughts on that one?
Yeah, I think a lot of it has to do with the grade, not only because it's obviously Barry Sanders, which is a boost, but the grade is what I think really kicks that thing into high gear because we were looking across all of the cards in that set, greens and reds, and there's 25 PSA 9s across any player, and then there's one PSA 10, which is what Orlando Pace.
Right.
Yeah, and they're all. Is that a red or a green?
It's a red.
Red. So I mean, that's pretty impressive when you have basically 26 total 9s or 10s. I think that had a lot to do with it. Regardless, though, I mean, it's still a high sale because, like, wouldn't you think that would be a high sale even if it's sold for like, I don't know, like in the 40s? I mean, we'd still say that was a pretty high sale. I mean, what?
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, I think this is where you're looking at set collecting, right? Registry, because it's hard to imagine that a Barry, well, I don't want to issue like a blanket statement like that, but a lot of Barry collectors, ones that I know, would much rather pay 16 grand for a PSA 6 than 54 for a PSA 9. But if you really do value grades, I mean, it's so highly subjective. You and I don't care so much about them, but you know, for some people, it's worth that insane premium, especially on cards where there are 135 copies. That's one way you can kind of stand out from the other owners of that card.
Yeah, I think that's another thing that we're going to start seeing too in the future with just really any of these PMGs or any other major parallels. We've seen like the bump in like some of these high prices for rubies, PMGs, and essential credentials. But I think as more of them start to come out, you're going to start seeing like the deciding factor between some of these prices is going to be the grade, because now that these cards are starting to come out and they're making record sales, now people are going to start saying, okay, well, we've seen that. Now we're going to start really focusing on the higher grade for these. And that's where, like you said, the set collectors, I really think it leans more towards the set collectors are the ones that are paying for the higher grades, because again, they are putting together like a registry set, especially when you see like a PSA sale. I don't think like the player collectors or even the team collectors are the ones that are necessarily paying more for the higher grade as they start to come out. I think people are going to start with. I think this is a telltale sign of with these reds in really any sport, the red or like greens too, but mainly the reds. I think you're going to start seeing more people really, really paying up for just the higher grades, like when you get in like the 8s or 9s, even just in general, even player collectors, because like you said, there are significantly more than the other sets, being out of 50. And I think even like player collectors are going to start getting into paying up for when they can upgrade a grade for a player that they might have already. They might sell the lower grade and then upgrade if it makes sense financially for them.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. That this copy in particular was really clean. I mean, you look at it, it looks like a legitimate 9. Now you have to take into account the idea that a modern 9 is not the same as a 90s 9, especially on this set where there's a lot of chipping. So you look at this copy, there's a little bit of corner whiting, and on one corner, and there's a little bit of edge chipping on the back. But I think it deserves a 9 relative to what other cards in the set get, especially things I've seen get 7s and 8s that should be lower. So I thought it was a strong sale, and I really can't criticize the sale because it's not like it was a 7 that just went for some insane price. It was a 9. It's the only 9 of his. I don't think there are any Rice 9s. You said there's a Favre 9. So the best players in the set, there's only a few 9s of those guys. So that makes sense. Another one I meant to touch on was the Dan Marino Precious Metal Gems. It was a green BGS copy. It was real. That sold last week on Weekly for $15,600. BGS 8, also a very, very clean copy. I think it had 9.5 centering, 8.5 corners, 8.5 edges, and surface of 7.5. But again, another one that, all things considered, had really, really nice edges, clean corners, etc. Anything to make out of that Merino sale at 15K? Do you think that was high, low, what you expected?
Maybe it's these higher sales for these cards now, but like, would you say it was 15K?
Yeah,
I mean, 15K almost for a green and an 8 almost seems like low to me. Just
it
given like
does seem low.
just given
Yeah,
what these other prices are, like that's got to be. I mean, if you're looking at like his best cards, that's got to be where would that rank? I mean, that's got to be up there in
yeah,
top 2, 1, right?
right. Yeah, I
He
think
doesn't
so.
have
Probably
anything
top
later
2.
than that. Yeah, I mean that's got to be a really really high card on like a Merino hierarchy. So to see like his best card essentially go for 15K just seems really low for a quarterback like that. So I don't know. Maybe
Yeah,
it's just because these sales are so high that 15K doesn't seem like a lot anymore to me. I don't know, but I don't know. It seemed low.
it's kind of reassuring in some ways. Like, I do think it's too low relative to what others have sold for.
That's what I
But
meant. Yeah.
like, yeah, Marvin Harrison, 17 grand or whatever it was. Some of these other guys, I mean, you could buy the Marshall Falk right now for $26,000 on eBay from Deep Value Investor if you want to. You just go on there and click Ben, and so that seems like a reasonable price. But the Merino, I think, I just I don't know if it's like a Merino thing or it's a green thing. You never know. Sometimes, like, this card might have done better on Premiere, might have done better on Golden Elite or something like that with a little bit more. I didn't see much advertising for it. It wasn't the same as it would be if it had been on one of those bigger auctions. So I'm a little surprised that they didn't do that, but I agree with you. Seems a little low. Um, let's look at the listener questions. We've got 3 this week. I'm going to ask the first one here is from Andy at Baba Baby Cards. And he wants us to discuss comparing comps of similar cards of players, and I think he means cross sport, as a way to predict future pricing, primarily based on legacy or quality of each player on the field. Kind of walk us through what he means and then what your thoughts on that are.
Yeah. Andy messaged me about this and he just wanted general discussion about this. I think there's been, as of late especially, but overall there's always this comparison and I mean it's kind of pumping too because
Big time
you
pumping.
see a lot
Yeah.
of yeah, you see a lot of like big accounts and consignment accounts and that pumping on Instagram, this card in a different sport or a different player went for this, so like this card should go for that, and taking polls about, do you think it's to go over under this or whatever, and it's always seems to relate to like, if this player who's a better player in our eyes is only sitting at this price right now at auction. But then this player who's kind of comparable or even maybe worse in another sport went for way more. This thing should go higher. And it's like, in reality, when you look at cards and cards prices and what drives them, it really doesn't have much to do with how good the player was on the field. I mean, you can just look at what goes on every single year right now at the National when it comes to buying quarterbacks. Like you look at some of these, like these prospected quarterbacks, they haven't done anything. The price is baked into really like what they should do. it's prospect. I'm not saying that these Hall of Fame players, from back in the 90s are prospecting, but I'm just saying like it's hype. Hype drives prices. It's not necessarily how good the player is. And there's also a lot more things to look at too with the cards. So like I'll just reference one that's being talked about now is like a set that we talked about on our first episode, the finest embossed refractors, the golds. Okay, so there's a comparison right now about a Favre Gem Mint 10 gold embossed refractor on Fanatics that's being listed or being auctioned this week. It's being compared to a player, a comparable player, maybe in a baseball set. Okay, so if you know about the baseball set in 1997, there really wasn't there wasn't a 97 Rubies, there wasn't a 97 PMG. Um, there was really nothing compared to that. That finest embossed gold set was made for baseball, and that was probably like one of the top sets in 97. So those sell high regardless. They're not serial numbered just like the football ones, but the football in general doesn't sell as good as baseball. It's never going to sell as good as baseball. So to say like, oh, this player is as good or maybe even worse in baseball as the current as Brett Favre, and he sold for like 4K, so Favre should get that much. It doesn't compare, and it's really just it's straight up pumping, in my opinion. And I mean, people can do whatever they want, especially like if you're consigning. Like I get it. I mean, you're doing that, but you have to look at it's like intentional market manipulation right in front of you, and it's really actually feeding people incorrect information. Like you're not really talking about the set and really in depth as to why a player's value should be somewhere, and you're really just comparing what's on the field and not really cards. This is collecting cards, not collecting players or buying fantasy football or baseball players.
Yeah, I think it's a lot is so heavily dependent. Cross sport comparison is very difficult. I mean, we've talked about 24 carats. We mentioned it last week. Jordan's not in that set. Some might say, wow, that set is undervalued. It's been disregarded because of Jordan. It's going to catch up to baseball and football. And to its credit, some cards do outsell a lot of baseball and football cards, but that doesn't mean that just because people like it in those other sports that they're all going to sudden start liking it in basketball or the grand finale football and basketball. The 90, I think it's 97 basketball, 98 football. It's the vertical card. Like that has been used as a comparison. I think like Michael Jordan to Barry Sanders. And it's like, what should the multiple be here? It's like, well, that's not really, they're both grand finales, but first of all, that's Michael Jordan. And just because he's the highest seller in basketball, or just because Barry Sanders is the highest seller in football up there with Rice, doesn't mean that he's going to sell at Jordan levels, And similarly, that card is hand numbered to 50. It's not numbered at all on the football set. And while the print run was confirmed by Upper Deck when it was released as a 50 card print run, there's still marketplace confusion. I mean, we've seen PSA, BGS slab golds as grand finales, and people don't always know that the hologram is supposed to be gold. They see the rest of the card as gold and they think it's a grand finale. So there's a little bit of marketplace confusion there that's going to prevent it from being just as backdoor PMGs prevent they put a limit or a ceiling on the potential of those cards. I think that's the same for the SPX grand finale. And you can do that with a lot of different sets. So I think cross sport comparisons is fine, but like you said, it's a little bit misleading if you're not getting into an analysis of why you're comparing them and maybe why they're different as is.
Yeah, it's okay to, if you're looking at a card and you're trying to find like, maybe value in something across sport. For example, like if you look at football, like everybody knows football cards sell generally cheaper, overall than baseball and definitely basketball, right? And if you want to compare like, oh, the stars in baseball do this and I can get the same level generally of stars in football for a significantly less price than even like baseball and definitely basketball, and I'm finding value in collecting that lane, and I think I'm getting a good value for that. That's fine. Like that's okay to do like a relative comparison. But just because like, you know, Jordan Jordan is the best basketball player obviously of all time. I mean, I think I share that sentiment with a lot of people. He's also one of the best athletes of all time. So to look at like Tom Brady, who might be up there too as one of the best athletes of all time, no matter what way you cut it, he's not the same as Michael Jordan. Like you have a cultural icon, a person that has a collector's base that collects a lot of that's another thing. The collectors like does that the fans of that player collect cards. Michael Jordan has a very strong card collector fan base, and he's had that since he's been in the league. He's been in the league for a very long time through the heart of the growth of the hobby. So like to say, oh, Tom Brady should get the same prices for X card as Michael Jordan, it's not fair. But you could say, and it's really not even reasonable either to say something like that, like, oh, I'm going to buy Tom Brady because he's eventually going to get the same price as Jordan. It's not the same. You could look at it as like, oh, I like Tom Brady. I like football. Tom Brady's the best football player of all time. I look at Jordan in that sport as being the best basketball player. I'm finding value in his cards because they're significantly cheaper. And like that's okay. But to just draw the straight comparison and say, oh, Jordan should be this much. It's kind of like when, all this stuff was coming out, I guess a couple years ago and even through this year of like, is Peyton Manning undervalued? And I understand like the people that were saying that, like it makes sense. If you're comparing Peyton Manning to Tom Brady prices, is he undervalued? Okay, maybe, because you could argue that Peyton Manning was a better quarterback than Brady or vice versa. But to just say that he's undervalued and he should be getting the same price as Brady, what's to say that like Tom Brady's cards weren't overvalued or overpriced and Payne's are priced exactly where they should be? So it's like you can't really just draw this comparison of like play on the field. Like since their play was so close, their prices should be exactly the same. It doesn't work that way. It really works to do the fans of that player or team, do they collect cards and what are they going to pay for it? Green Bay Packers fans pay a lot of money for cards. They overpay for cards. It's widely known. They probably pay more for cards as a team fan base as any other team in the NFL. That doesn't mean that Dorsey Levens is a better running back than some of the other running backs from that era in the league. It just means that you have a really strong fan collector base for those cards, and they're going to sell higher. So you can't draw the comparison.
Yeah, I think that once you get into, well, I'll just say this for people who are seeing comparisons being made, and it's within the context of a sale of the quote unquote undervalued card. Be skeptical, think critically about that, and don't just assume that because you're seeing this comparison that you should go and spend more on this money, spend more on this undervalued card because it's going to catch up to the big seller and you're going to make money. Bad strategy. Just be critical when you're seeing those, especially in the form of advertisements. Who's our next question from?
All right, so the next one's from mostly 90s basketball cards. It says, what card in your collection gives you the highest enjoyment per dollar?
This one was really difficult for me because I was looking at raw cards, some of the cheaper raw cards, and I guess the analysis I took was like among my very favorite cards, my top 10 favorite cards, which of them do I feel like I got the best deal on? And because in that sense, like a lot of them are clustered. I mean, it's very hard for me to pick favorites from my collection. I could get it probably a top 5, but once you get beyond that, everything's pretty tight. So I really just went with sort of the best value I feel like I got. And I settled on my 99 PMG of Favre. It was my first big Favre card. It's that and the 24 karat are neck and neck for me in terms of my favorite of his cards. And, when I consider that I got it for half the price of the 24 karat, 40% of the price of the 98 PMG. It's really a no-brainer for me. I think that's got to be my pick. What about you?
I could probably easily say like the 24 karat Favre, and that's if I was making like a list of like, you know, 3 or 5, I'd probably say that. But I think the one that comes to me right off the top of my head is probably the um it's I'll say two. The Ryan Braun, the '05 Superfractor, just because it's really tough to get the best card of one of your main PC players, but then also combine that with the best card of probably the team that you collect. So I'm trying to put together, obviously I collect Ryan Braun, getting all of his best cards, but I'm also trying to put together the best Brewers collection that I can. And that's a extremely significant, if not the best Brewers card ever made. So, you know, to me, a non-Brewers fan, non-Braun fan would think that like, yeah, you overpaid for that card. But for what, you know, I feel like I put into it, I really don't care because I'm never going to get rid of the thing. It's just, that's one of those cards it's never going to leave. It just gives me too much enjoyment to know that like I have his best card. I have like, you know, probably the best card made of the Brewers. And then the other one is probably the Antonio Freeman green PMG. I just feel like, you know, the way that I love PMGs, to have a green. It's the only green that I have. It's probably the only green that I'm gonna get. I want at least one. I figured I could get one with either Favre or Freeman, and really I probably won't get one with Favre because they're a lot, and there's other cards I would rather have than that of him. So to at least have it as in Freeman, and got a good deal on it. I mean, not a good, just a fair price, and just his prices in general are not huge. So I guess those are the two that that come to mind right away for me.
I'll throw in my Bagwell Gym Masters just because, like what you were saying about Braun, like it's the best card of a player I collect. It's really hard to. I mean, obviously, I paid up for it, but seeing what other 99 Gym Masters have gone for, um, I know what the Larry Walker um, went for. It was about the same as mine, but a lot of others have gone for more, and I, privately, and so I feel pretty good about that. So even though I did pay a decent amount, having the best card of a player is pretty tempting choice. All right, last one here from Yeah Man Cards. What do you guys think about buying doubles? I think we had this one from Austin a few weeks ago, but like I said, we answer every question, even if it has been asked before. So, what do you think about buying doubles, Brian?
Yeah, another reason why I put that on there, I want to answer it, even though we did kind of talk about it with Austin's question a few weeks back, was that recently, you know, in this Packer Grails group chat that I'm in on IG has a lot of big Packers collectors, and one of the collectors in there, he collects a lot of he has great cards obviously, but he gets a lot of duplicates of like every big card that he gets anytime they come up. And he's one of the few people, like really strong collectors of teams and players that I collect, that I see buying a lot of duplicates. And he doesn't just buy them; he holds them for a while. And a lot of times, like even if I'll message him regularly in the group chat and then privately, like, you know, would you ever consider? You got 2 or 3 of this card. Like, I need it. Would you? Like, I'll pay up for it. Would you mind moving it? No, I'm kind of waiting for like a trade, or I'm waiting for a better price. So it really breeds, it's kind of like patience, and it really is just, he's buying these cards because he knows that he could move them down the road in a trade, or, you know, and get higher value for them, or sell them if he needs to. And it's probably smart when you get a good value on something, a good price on it, even if you do collect and you have it already. It's like, if you can do it, it might be really really smart to do. And I'm not in the position to do it right now, but like down the road, if things pop up, you know, of cards that I already have, I might snag duplicates and try to use them as trade bait down the road. So I think it is a good idea. It's very smart. It's just right now, it's not, as I've answered Austin's question before with the same answer. It's not in the, it's no pun intended, it's not on the cards for me right now. But down the road, I could see it happening. And I think anybody who does it, it's very, very smart.
Yeah, I've always had the same problem as you, which is like, I know that I could be buying a different card on my want list, but two things. One, having the duplicate for trade purposes is really fantastic. And knowing that you can be choosy, especially if it's a rare, really rare card. It's the emotional connection of letting go of a duplicate isn't as bad, especially when you've got something nice coming back your way. And then another thing is that even if I didn't necessarily think I could line up a trade for it, finding a card that's really undervalued, and like if you go to, I don't know, a yard sale or local show, local card shop or whatever, and you just get lucky and you find something that's not even necessarily in a dollar box, but I don't know, Favre 24 karat for like $1,500. The guy hasn't checked the prices, something like that, where it's just undervalued. You're just like, I gotta buy this, because it's gonna be easy for me to move for something I want more down the line. So I'm not a big fan of buying them, generally speaking. But if these specific scenarios arise where I can get a good deal and I think it's a good piece to eventually trade, then I'll do it. Okay, let's get into the main segment, which is sort of the initial reception of PMGs, the market timeline, and when everything was released. So this is just kind of our overview. So I'm going to defer to Brian to share his screen here and take us through this brief slideshow that we prepared for you guys. Well, Brian prepared for you.
And said it was kind of time we were waiting to put something together for PMGs that was going to be more than just like a single episode where we're talking about one of the sets, or we're kind of just lumping things together and summarizing it like we kind of do with other sets. We don't get super in depth. Some of the sets we talk a little bit about specific cards and that, but we really want to do something special with the precious metal gems across all sports and all years, and really get in depth and talk about the intricacies and the differences in the cards, our favorite ones from the set, and bring on some people that are new, that most, if any, have never heard from on a podcast or a show, to kind of bring more insight. Because at the end of the day, Zay and I are just, we're collectors and we like to research things and learn about sets, but we don't have all the answers. There's people out there, plenty of people out there that have more information and more knowledge than we do. So we wanted to be able to, give our insight, but then also defer to those people, with this. So I kind of wanted to start off putting this together as just kind of a brief overview of, the rollout and the timeline that these cards were released, these parallels were released. I think there's a lot of confusion with them, and when it comes to like the release and the overall sentiment when they first came out. But to start off, I kind of want to talk about a little why we care so much about precious metal gems. And you hear a lot of people talk about, why precious metal gems are, it's just another parallel. The 97s in football were out of 135. Like, it's a card that's out of 135. Why does it matter so much? Why is it so important? Or even with basketball, like, it's out of 90. It's not. Why is it more significant than like a legacy or like a platinum medallion? What is it really about these cards that we care about from all the different years, and what is it that really makes them important to us in our collection? I don't know. Do you have thoughts on that, Zan, before we get started?
Yeah, I think certainly some of why we love them is generated by the fact that other people like them. I think that's unavoidable, but at the same time, like there's a connection that we look back at these sets that were virtually worthless monetarily when we were younger, but were very important to us as kids, even though they didn't have monetary value. They had a lot of sentimental or emotional value. And so to be able to now kind of find something that connects, especially with you and me, because we love metal was like one of our favorite sets, if not our favorite set. So something that really connects our present collecting to our past collecting, our taste for getting rare cards and having these really nice cards of really good players, to that, when we were young and we couldn't afford these types of cards. So that, and just having distinct designs that you don't see anymore. I mean, you've got, like we said, we talked about Panini just kind of printing small variants of the same cards over and over, and you just don't get anything like this anymore.
Yeah, I think for me it's the same. It's everything that you said, but I think the two biggest things for me is why as to why I care about PMG so much is the connection, the nostalgia with the players. So it's like the 97 through 99 grouping of players and really all the sports was like the peak for me. Football, baseball, and basketball. So you have the players, the nostalgia for those. And then it's like the perfect mix and combinations of designs in every one of the sets. Like I don't know if there's another parallel that that ran for 3 years or multiple years where I can look at it and say I love every single every year of that parallel and every design. Now, like I've talked about plenty of times before, like the 98s used to not be my favorite, but like over time it's really grown on me, and I have this really strong appreciation for that set because every year is so unique. And you mentioned the design. I think the uniqueness of the design and the technology that they use, like these things were not cheap to make, and to their art form. It's a strong form of art as a pack of cards, and to see this art display and this unique design that's really unlike anything else in 3 different years and 3 different sports is just really amazing to me. And I think that's something that's just really important, regardless of whether what the print run is or what the value of the cards is. Just overall, it's just they're so unique and they're so different and so cool, and it just really draws in the nostalgia and everything else.
I think when you look at, just briefly before you go to the next slide, um, when you compare those sort of the 3-year runs, you've got, I know Essential Credentials has 7 years or 8 years or whatever it is, but when you're looking at the main years, 97 to 99, you kind of think, well, 99 is kind of the weak link. You look at Rubies, again, I know there's 2000, but 97 to 99 are the three main ones. 99 is kind of the weak link. But for Precious Metal Gems, none of them are the weak link. I think people would say, well, maybe the Reds are the weak link, but that's only by virtue of having 135 copies, not because of the aesthetic or anything like that, or the iconic status of the set. It's so, to me, all 3 years are just really, really strong.
Yeah, it's like, when people say, well, that show on TV was really good, but they just ran it too long and it got old and it kind of ruined it. It's like PMGs being 3 years. It's like they didn't overdo it. They just, every single year was just, great. And then they just left it at that. So I think they just did it perfectly with the 3-year run. I mean, some people I even do, and I like gold refractors, but like I get tired of them. I mean, it's like a gold refractor in like every year, and it's just, it is what it is. So there's just something different about this like 3-year run. It was like just enough, just a perfect amount, and just the best design. You could tell they weren't just dragging it along and trying to sell cards. They were trying to do something special with this parallel. So, all right. So again, as I mentioned at the top of this, the timeline of these releases gets kind of confused, and people, may have trouble understanding when these cards were released. Did the best I could with the research and the release with the release dates with Beckett. They do a pretty good job of keeping tabs on those. But the first PMG set, now remember, baseball didn't have, and we mentioned this in the last week's episode, baseball didn't have PMGs. They had 2 metal sets with no PMGs. And a loyal listener, and a person that messages pretty often, Tasty Card Sandwich on Instagram, reached out to Arena Design and just straight up asked after last week's episode, like, why didn't baseball have PMGs for their 96 or their 97 set? And the response that he got pretty quick was that they were basically, that was like a test. Those were test years, and they were really just kind of getting their feet wet with the metal set. And they did have the platinum in baseball that they were kind of testing out that technology, but it was really like the test sets for what we now come to understand or like is of the PMGs. So the platinums were kind of like the baseball's initial PMGs. They were unnumbered, obviously, and not as rare, but that was like the test copies. But the first real release of the PMGs was in July 16th, 1997 with the 97 metal football set. And then you had the November 5th, 1997 release of the basketball set. Both of those are the same design. As I said before, no baseball that year. Then you get into 1998, and things get a little interesting too. So basketball, the 97 metal basketball set was released with the box stating that it was Series 1, which usually infers that, okay, there's going to be a Series 2 coming out. Well, there wasn't a Series 2. It was all released in one series, and all these sets were released in one series. But baseball was the first of the circles design, the scope design as we come to know it. With 98 Metal Universe Baseball was released on March 11th of 98. Then basketball, which is the 97-98, it's the same season technically as the 97, the red and green Metal Universe set, but they call it the 97-98 Metal Universe Championship basketball set. And that was in April 1st of 1998. And why that gets kind of confusing is it was released basically during the same season. And some people even today think like, oh, that was like the second series of that set with just a different design. But it wasn't an extension of that. It's its own separate set that we came to find out later. And then the August 12th, 1998 was the Metal Universe football set. So all those in 98 had that scope design. They all had the cityscapes. Any thoughts or opinions on that? I know if you're on the YouTube, if you're following on YouTube, we have a nice presentation here that has some cards and some designs and everything laid out here for you with this timeline.
Yeah, so interestingly, like the basketball situation is with the red greens and then the championship. It does feel like a Series 1 and Series 2 because they're only the release is only separated by 6 months, and you have it. It was released in a way where the championship set is only 100 cards. So it's a very small set and almost feels like a supplement to the original, despite having, the same players that are all in the reds and greens. But you look at football was 298, 200 cards. Baseball is 220. So those were almost like full sets that included a lot of what you may want to call peripheral or fringe players versus, championship. Obviously the league is smaller in basketball, but still 100 cards for basketball set, especially of that importance, was fairly small. I think and then jumping over to what Arena Design said, I think that's kind of interesting. I could see that the 96 metal would be a test set, but it's odd to me that the 97 metal was released in 97 when these other sets were being released. So what were they testing at that point? Or why did they feel comfortable, or why did they feel sure about releasing reds and greens in basketball and football, but not in baseball, especially since they had quote unquote tested baseball in 96. So I'm not sure. I'd like to get more information on that if anyone has that. Maybe we'll have Arena Design or someone from that on an episode.
Yeah, and I'll read the message. It was I may have misspoke, but it was because we did they said, so asked why there was no precious metal gems in baseball in 1997. They responded because we did baseball first. Obviously, once that released we would open the product up. So again, it was like the initial release, and it's kind of inferring that it was a test. They don't come out and directly say it's a test, but when you say it was released first and then we would open the product up, they go on to say that it was thought that we needed to add something to the NBA release, which was next. And then the baseball has the silver parallel, the platinum parallel with no color background. So they're inferring that it's like they're testing out this technology, and that they needed to design something further for these other sets. And they refer to the basketball release.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. At that point, you'd had Flair Showcase introducing the numbered cards and credentials. Obviously, this is all in the same company. But I think once you're looking at individual products, they're probably saying, well, numbered cards is the way of the future. We need to make that happen. I'd be curious to know why it was. And one thing I want, why the print runs were what they were. And I do want to back up briefly. Just, we are trying to make this as simple as possible for people who we assume no knowledge of these sets. So the 97 football was 135 red copies, 15 green copies. All cards are numbered out of 150. So if you get a card that's 1 through 15 in the print run, it's green. 16 through 150 are red. And then in basketball, same deal, but it's unlimited to 100 total copies. So every card's out of 100. First 10 are green, and then the last 90 are red. But I wonder why they went with different numbers there. It was kind of strange. And then every other year they switched to 50 after that.
Yeah, my thought maybe was that with basketball or with football being the first release, they probably designed both of these cards around the same time. They just released them at different times. But it's like maybe they saw, like, when they actually started to print, they designed the cards, but maybe when they started really running them to print, maybe these things aren't cheap to print with that foil overlay. Like, they're expensive cards to print. So maybe when they ran that print run of 135 or 150 PMGs, they felt like, well, our sweet spot with profit margin and that sort of thing is probably like 100 of these things. So maybe like cost effectiveness had something to do with it. Like with baseball too, they have the strange scenario. We'll talk more when we get to like the baseball set, in weeks to come. But with the 98 Metal Universe baseball set, they have the 45 cards, the first 45 of the print run released in the packs. And then you had the last 5, 46 through 50 of all the PMGs released with redemption cards that were found in packs, where you could get a redemption card. There's 5 complete PMG sets. There's 5 of those redemption cards in packs somewhere. And you get that redemption card and you turn in like a redemption today and you get a complete PMG set. I mean, one can only imagine. But so like, what made them do that with those and then not like basketball and football for that year? So it's like there's some things, mysteries that I kind of would want to know why in this set and not the others. All right, so the next slide, we get to the 99s. 99s are pretty straightforward. They were all released in 99. I guess the thing to note here, with baseball being released in January of 99, I couldn't get an exact date on some of these. Like, I saw a lot of January 1st, but January 11th. So I just put January 99 was the baseball release. Basketball was released in between January and February. I could not find anything anywhere on a confirmed release date for this basketball set. If anybody's got any information, please reach out to me or Zan. But I think it had to do with the fact that it was released after the lockout. So the lockout ended in February. They started playing games again early February. And I think maybe they needed that lockout to end before they could release that product. So it was kind of an odd release date for basketball. And then you had football released in July. It's pretty consistent over the summer. That's when usually our football sets are released. But all the cards they're all out of 50. They all have a similar aesthetic as with the other sets. It's that metallic gold refractor type finish, gold foil refractive type finish. Really beautiful cards. They really get down to the roots of the metallic look on these things.
One thing, yeah, I really love this year. I mean, a lot of people would cite it as their least favorite year, but a lot of people would also cite it as their very favorite year. It's to me just a big departure from the prior 2 years in a good way. They showed yet again why why the pinnacle of innovators at that time. One thing I've always thought was interesting was that none of the basketball years, 97, like the Red Greens championship or the 98 99s, none of those sets had subsets to them. So it was all just base designs for the card. So every PMG you get is just a base design of the card versus where baseball, starting in both years, really 98 and 99, it had subsets that you can get PMGs of. And for people listening, when I say subsets, I mean cards that are part of the base set that are numbered as base cards but look different, like the Hardball Galaxy in 98. And then in 99 for football and baseball, you had like the NFLPD, the MLPD, on the fly, building blocks, stuff like that, was you can get parallels or precious metal gems of those subsets. And basketball is the only one you can't. So another question that we may not have an answer to.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting too. And then the fact that they put it, you kind of find like some of these differences in like the first release sets where they're like trying something out and seeing what the reception's like, and then they're scrapping it or changing it for whatever reason. But like you're seeing it in the baseball, like for 99, you're seeing it in the baseball set in the football, but like basketball is released in the middle year. I don't know if they. I really would want to know like how they designed and where they released to decide the release schedule for these 99s. I believe that the lockout would have had a play on this, but did they like intend to release basketball at a different time, like earlier than baseball, or based on like the fact that they released the two basketball sets kind of together? Do they want to? There's no rookies in this set, in this 99 set for basketball. It's like, did they intend to include more players and like release this thing, earlier, but they paused it because of the lockout? It's like those are questions I would have for them, or I'd have for really anybody that knew the answer. And that those are things that just have always kind of, bothered me. Not bothered me, but I, made me think.
Yeah, no, I mean, the fact that there are no rookies in that set makes it, really an oddity, because so many of the basketball sets at that time did have the rookies, and I think that was Mike Bibby, Jason Williams, Dirk, Pierce, like all those guys. I believe that was the year, right? Or maybe a year late, but Bibby and Williams for sure. And then in baseball, obviously rookies isn't quite the same. It's more prospects. So instead of doing rookies, they do the building blocks subset to represent all the prospects. And then in football, you do have the rookies where they're all in college jerseys, but it says rookie at the top instead of the last name. So all these are little intricacies that we'll dig into more as we go through.
Yeah, I agree. All right, so getting into the initial reception of this, of PMGs in general, but specifically since the football set was the first release, what we did was we dug through a couple Beckett magazines and took a look. And I have to say, anybody listening to this, if you have old Beckett magazines, or you just go online and buy a couple for like $4 or $5 from like this era, I would do it, because some of the articles really all the articles are interesting. It's like, you're traveling through time, but to read some of the articles and the opinions on some of these in these Beckett magazines, and like just it brings out the nostalgia for, like, as I'm paging through, there's ads for like starting lineups, and there's ads for like, other sets of cards and stuff that are just really cool. And then there's also like, different ratings and different like discussions about what cards were hot at that time. It's really cool. I would suggest digging out some of those or buying some Beckett magazines and just really looking at some of those and the prices. And I think it's a really cool process to kind of hone in on to what you're collecting now and how that was received back in the day. But I'll talk about the football, Beckett, if you want to talk about the baseball one, Zan.
Yeah, sure. So, um, Beckett Baseball didn't spend a whole lot of time on the metal set. I mean, at that time, Finest, Flair Showcase, those were some of the bigger releases, the Upper Deck SPX. Metal was, as we said, just sort of a kid set. So they were kind of confined to a little sidebar here where they go over the specifics of the set. But here's a little, if you can't read this or if you're listening, it just says, for the last 2 seasons, Metal Universe has earned its niche in the hobby by placing today's players in front of out-of-this-world comic book backdrops. So we've seen some of that. Computer-altered backgrounds are still the brand's main gimmick, but for 98, that scenery is much more familiar. And this quote is from Fleer Skybox spokesman Doug Drotman, who said, "We felt that metal covered the galaxy and it was time to pick a world for this season. Earth seemed like the logical place to start." And then that was close quote. With landscapes linked to the ball club's city, Metal also offers a hobby exclusive precious metal gems parallel set with less than 50 serially numbered sets. So, yeah, that's about all they gave us in terms of the introduction of the set. Packs for $2.59. So, not a something where collectors were clamoring for more.
Yeah, I think what you could take away from that in terms of like the reception or the initial reception for that set, and we have screenshots on the YouTube channel, screenshots of these articles that we're referring to. You can take a look at those for yourself. But I guess what you could take from that for initial reception is that it wasn't even really anything worth talking about. It was kind of just like another set and it's different, and here's your little article about it in the Beckett magazine, and we're going to move on, probably because, being Fleer, that, they felt like obligated to talk about it, right? Beckett gets a little bit more edgy, I guess, with this, because again, the football release was the initial one. In this November 99 Beckett Monthly, there's an article called the ratings game. And they're talking about, good value, bad value. And they do this regularly. If you look at your old Beckett magazines, they talk about like undervalued or underrated cards and overrated cards in terms of like the prices and popularity. And you got to remember too, like how they got these prices. They're not looking at card ladder comps like we do to generate prices. They're not using that type of technology, which is, cutting edge. What they're doing is they're basically having a lot of different people talk to dealers and shops and stuff around the United States to get general pricing quotes and ideas. And Beckett has a team, including at this time Dr. Becker. He's talking to a lot of these big dealers and sellers and collectors across the country to find out what they would pay and what the prices of these cards are, and they're collaborating with them. So, and you can see that just based on the fact that most sets that they list in the Beckett magazine, they're not listing every single card. They're listing like the highlighted cards in the set. So very rarely, unless it's like a vintage set at that time, like I'm talking 50s, 60s, 70s, they're not listing every card. For the 90s stuff, there's so many sets that were coming out. They were just listing like a handful of the star players generally. So anyway, in this ratings game article, they talk about underrated, where they highlight cards like 1984 Topps Eric Dickerson rookie for $5. That's underrated. The 1989 Topps trade Barry Sanders for $6 and some others. And then you look over at the overrated section. Number 2 on the list is the 1997 metal green PMG of Barry Sanders for $1,000. And this is what really got to me. It made me laugh. It was the sentence underneath that says scarcity, schmarcity. Okay, so there's just 15 of each in existence, but come on, $1,000? Question mark. It's I guess it's funny to look today at that, and looking back, $1,000 for a card, That's a significant price. I mean, we're talking like mantle prices. I should have looked at what like a 52 mantle was going for in 98, but I can't imagine it was more than a couple $1,000s. So to say like, hey, this Barry Sanders card being out of 15 is about the price of something like that, and well off more than like, Hank Aaron or Ted Williams or any of those others, or, even a Lou Gehrig at the time. So it's like, you look at something like that and you have to put it in context. Okay, $1,000 was a lot, but the way that they kind of bashed that set right out of the gates, I mean, they weren't pumping this thing. It's not like you see on Instagram now where it's like you look anywhere you look, you see accounts just pumping different cards and how great they are and this and that and the other thing. It's crazy to see that they were, and this is Barry Sanders too, like near the end of his career, like he's done everything. He's the best running back in football, and they're not talking about Barry Sanders like driving the price up. They're just saying this card is just overvalued, and it's kind of crazy to me and fun to look at.
Here's another passage from Beckett Baseball, separate issue. But this kind of tells you what people thought of Metal Universe and why $1,000 seemed crazy, because this is what they thought of the set. Hey, wait a minute. Where's the 3-toed sloths and the 8-armed mutants? Metal Universe, which has always been known for its whacked out comic book backgrounds, takes a more realistic feel for 98. So you can see that they thought of it basically as just a comic book, a Marvel, a way for them to channel sports through superheroes. So there was, I think, it was hard to stomach or hard to think about $1,000 card from a set like that at the time.
A lot of people like to draw comparisons now to, the cards that are most valuable now from the 90s typically are the ones that kids really liked, like us. But, we were always looking for these things. You could never find them, and they're out of our budget, like the rubies and the essential credentials. Like, older guys like my dad and, parents of ours and relatives, like that collected cards, they weren't buying PMGs. They weren't buying rubies or essential credentials or any of that stuff, or even chrome cards in general. They were buying vintage stuff. So really, like at that time, it was the cards that kids liked that are now worth the most because we were kids back then and we have nostalgia for it. So a lot of people draw comparisons now to like, well, couldn't you say the same thing about like a Downtown or like a Kaboom or any of the MAGA type stuff that they have, or whatever the art cards that they have? Yeah, you could say that, but the way I look at it, there's also a rarity and a scarcity thing that's comes into play with this. I don't think it's directly related, like, oh, let's just go buy everything that like a kid buys now and hold it for 15, 20 years, and then it's going to be worth a ton of money. I don't think it works that way right now. I mean, quite honestly, if you go to a show, I think there's just as many kids buying Prism Golds and blacks and or finites and other things like that as there are buying downtowns and whatnot. So I think we're just in a different landscape. So I think to sit and just easily draw that comparison between, well, kids bought that, so that's worth money now, let's just go run and buy everything a kid likes now and it'll be worth money down the road. I don't think it really works. But it does. You get what I'm trying to say? It doesn't work like that.
Yeah, right. Yeah, you can't predict the lineage or the legacy, I should say, of how it's going to come out.
Yeah, there's a lot of factors that came into play with PMGs. All right. So let's talk a little bit about early pricing initially with football. And I'll go through all the sets with this. One thing I will say, too, is that I didn't put on initial reception with basketball, though there are articles that talk about it in the design. The reception didn't seem to be the same, as far as what I could see, as same deep negativity as it was with football initially, because remember when basketball came out, it wasn't the first release in any of these, and they've already talked about the design before that. And really, I think the basketball fans of that era, the people who were buying the basketball cards of that era, were younger in general, and that's why they were hotter. The prices were higher. You're going to see even over time back then, the prices of these things were way more for basketball. And that's, I think, to do because of the reception overall of the basketball fan and collector at that time. But looking at these prices, this is from that same November 98 Beckett Monthly magazine, where They broke it down, like if you're familiar with the Beckett magazine, they don't give the price on every card, but they put multipliers underneath the main set. So it said like, the Metal Universe set was listed here as the base, where it's like $1, $2, $3 cards. And then it gives a multiplier of like the precious metal stars were 40 to 80 times the high column. And then the young stars were 35 to 70. And then the rookies were 15 to 30. And then the greens were 2.5 to 5 times the the red PMG prices. So you have to do some math when you're calculating this first set. And I didn't pick a 97 magazine right when this came out, because we know that like with the initial release, the way Beckett, as I explained, was designed was it took some months to a year to like really get a firm price range with these things. So I tried to pick like the year after to kind of see where they were at with this, when everything kind of settled down and they could spend some time, honing the prices on this set. So if you look at this, what I have laid out here is I have the actual article, but I have the Favre and Barry I highlight. They were about $100, $200 for the red PMG, high and low. And then the Rice was 50 to 100, which is crazy. And then you have the rookies. Some of the high rookies were the Dillon and the Dunn. Dunn was the highest priced rookie at the time, $75 to 150. And then the Corey Dillon was 45 to 90. And then with the green PMG, those were 2.5 to 5 times the red prices. So the Favre and the Barry were both $500 to $1,000 cards. And then the Rice, that's where that article came from, the $1,000 for Barry. And then the Rice being 250 to 500 for a green PMG. Just, insane from back in the day.
Yeah, these were pretty surprising. And remember, Beckett would price a lot based on kind of word of mouth and what information they got from hobby shops of reported sales, because at that time we didn't have centralized online marketplaces, so a lot of it was kind of hearsay or unreliable data. And so that's why you have these somewhat sizable ranges, like for Favre and Barry on the green, 500 to 1,000. That's a pretty big range. So yeah, these are obviously in line with kind of what we thought, which is that this was not a particularly well received set when it first came out, in terms of prices anyway.
Yeah, and think of this too. Like, think if you could go, if they had like a Beckett magazine back in the 50s. Think if you could look at like articles like when Topps was released, or the first Topps set was released, or the prices on these cards initially, if they had a magazine like that. That's why we have the benefit. It's really cool to have the benefit of these types of magazines in the 90s, when these cards that we collect now were out. It's like, as I mentioned before, it's kind of like taking a time machine back in time and looking at some of this stuff. And I think it's really cool to see and kind of draw that bridge and that connection to what we connect now or collect now, and what we pay for these things, and how they've actually really grown and appreciated in value and popularity, similar to like the vintage in the 50s. And that obviously that has it's went up extreme amount, just like this, and more consistently and long term. But we don't have that like connection necessarily with a price guide and articles and stuff about these releases. They were released, the 50s cards were released in gum. It wasn't meant to be necessarily a collection. It was meant to sell gum. These were sold as a collectible item, and that's why you have all these articles in the magazine. That's what it's really cool to look at. When we look at basketball, so here you go, and you can see the discrepancy in prices. I just highlighted the Jordan and the Kobe. You have the Jordan, and again, this is from a 99 Beckett, January 99 Beckett. This is about a year after, or so, a little bit less of a year that the basketball set came out. But you have the Jordan Red PMG at 350 to 750. And then you have the Jordan Green PMG at 3,800 to 8,500. So in comparison, again, they were talking about they being Beckett, the columnists were talking about the Barry Sanders being $1,000 and being overvalued. You got Jordan cards here going for, the red PMG for about 750, and the green, significantly more than that. So you can see the difference in pricing, probably again because of their overall reception of the basketball fan. And collectors and kids and fans, they love these cards. I mean, this wasn't like something that came out where like, people didn't like. I remember when this stuff came out, and I wanted these cards. I think most kids did. They were popular with kids. They just weren't popular with like the columnists and the price guide and the people that I guess you would call them now the
Purists.
purists,
Yeah.
the influencers, right? The
Right.
Beckett magazine was the influencer back then. And then you got the Kobe at 220 to 500, and then the Kobe Green at about 1320 to 3000, and that's kind of tough to price because I was going off of the rookie percentage increase, and it's a 97 98 set. It's not so, but that's probably roughly where it would be back then. And then the average for that set for really any player was about like $20 to $40 or so for the Reds, and then 40 to 100 ish for the Greens, give or take. And you got the baseball pricing if you want to talk about that.
Yeah, sure. Baseball was better than football. Not quite up to the basketball levels, obviously. But Griffey, $500 on the mint, and Cal Ripken and Frank Thomas at $400. Piazza and A-Rod in the $300 range. And then you had a handful of players at $250, including Jeter, Nomar, Juan Gone, Hideo Nomo in there. Looks like Gwynn, Chipper Jones, also in there around 250. And then Bonds is down there. I just included him. He's at 120. I would say that's I put best early reception of any sport. I don't think it's best early reception of any sport. Maybe best early reception over football, but a strong, I would say pretty strong, given what we read about it in the baseball magazine. Even if Beckett didn't necessarily take it seriously, obviously people were paying solid prices for these, in line with, below, but we looked at some of the Crusade Reds. We looked at 96 Mirror Golds. Those were a little bit higher, obviously, but this was a pretty strong start. So it's not like these were dollar box cards at the release, but you could see kind of how guys like McGuire, too, $400. I forgot to put him in there because he was in the middle of his historic season. So it kind of gives you a little bit of information here on the screenshot that a lot of these all-star players were selling for $150 and up.
Yeah, and I would go back to the fact that it probably was the best early reception, because when you read that article, you talked about how they perceive that set. It's kind of like how Fleer was trying to change the design, because maybe they got bashed a little bit for that comic book design by the purists, right? And in the Beckett magazine too, where maybe they were going to change it up and say, okay, we're going to do, kind of landscapes, and we're going to kind of change it up. And maybe that had a factor into, we were going to get away from like the comic book childish, design, and we're going to go to something a little bit more, balanced, where maybe it could draw in somebody, a little bit older crowd and the younger crowd. So it might have had the best reception, where they weren't really bashing that design, that they've never seen that scope design really before. They meaning like people who were collecting at that time. And then it was, kind of a more mild tempered back, where you could see fans of a particular team in that city could say like, oh, that's cool. If I'm from New York, I want the Statue of Liberty on the Jeter card, or I want the trade towers on the David Cohn, or the, I like I put the Chipper Jones picture on that first slide, but with that cornfield and that, he's kind of a, he's kind of a country boy. So I like how they tied in the cityscapes. To me as a kid, like I've mentioned this before, it kind of turned me off because I wanted the comic book design at that time. But like looking back, I think I can see, like, I appreciate this design a lot, where it balanced it out a little bit.
Yeah, you appreciate it more as an adult when you understand the landmarks and Bonds in front of the Golden Gate Bridge, Jeter, like you mentioned, Scott Rowland in front of the love sign in Philly. So awesome. Gives us a little bit of a introduction here to everything. Have a few episodes here already lined up. We plan to do detailed overview and analysis of all 3 years for all 3 sports. Obviously, no 97 baseball, but all 5. I guess it's eight sets total because there's no 97 baseball. We're gonna have several guests on to talk about the history of the sets, the design of the sets, how to spot fakes, especially with the 97 reds and greens. Talk about a little bit how the market has changed, historical perspective on all that stuff related to PMGs. If you have any topics related to PMGs that you want us to discuss, please message that to us and we will be sure to include it. So stay tuned over the next few weeks. We have some really good episodes planned. In the meantime, enjoy week 4 of the NFL season, and we will catch you next week. All right. Hank